I'm Zahid, I'm the director for Max Propage Gallery in New York, and I'm working with Marilyn since a couple of years now. And I'm very, very much interested by his work for like several reasons. It was interesting for me the kind of like resonance of feminism in Europe and the way feminism has been perceived a little bit later in the 80s by people from my generation who work like, you know, more photographic, actually, like Cindy Sherman, Laurie Salmon, so a little bit more Sue Williams, and the way this woman coming from, you know, this kind of powerful movement from the end of the 60s talk about sexuality, which until now has been more or less the privilege of men, you know. It was like more a subject that you know, male artists treat on the work so directly, on so narrative way. So it's very interesting for me to see that all those actually women from the same generation are just like opening their mouths about it, and they have each one a very, very specific attitude regarding that. And Marilyn is very much interesting for this kind of like cheerfulness that she has. And the way she's talking about sexuality, and it was very interesting for me too to see how you know, advertising, for example, and more particularly in New York, with like, you know, extensive campaign like Calvin Klein or others, followers actually talk about sexuality to sell, you know, of the kind of contemporary attitude. And I think Marilyn's fit very much in this discourse somewhere, and in this way, you know, contemporary society appreciate, you know, sexuality and representation of sexuality. So this painting is very much representative somewhere of discourse, and I really like very much the reference, you know, in history of art and in pop art, more particularly, and the reference with like media and you know, popular culture, because that's at the source usually of the images, even if they are very much, you know, painterly represented by work. And it's a very interesting and unique mixture, I think. It's like, you know, this popular culture and this incredible knowledge and history of contemporary art and this incredible love she has for painting. And she's very unique on that, I think. While other people, you know, more working with photograph, I think she's really in the kind of unique position and the unique woman talking this way about, you know, sexuality with this medium of painting.
Language, it's got an alphabet, and if you know the language at all, then you can appreciate the poetry of it. And I learned art history, I learned painting, and so just, you know, I saw little Warhols, and I realized that paintings didn't have to be windows into somebody's reality. They could be images from the culture, images from the media. And people are made up of billions and billions of images, besides being, what is it, 89% water. They're all, you know, I think I read somewhere that you see 1,200 images a day, just being in the world. And I thought that I could make paintings from that stuff the same way landscape painters paint from their stuff, or portrait painters paint from, or abstract painters paint from that image, you know, it's an image too. So painting just makes sense to me. I think I did some very interesting work when I was very young, and then I got distracted. And there was a long period of time in the early 80s where I really wasn't doing anything very interesting. And I started working with this artist. I didn't know, by the way, that they weren't interesting until like 5 years ago. I'm starting to look through like stacks and stacks of really bad paintings, and I never wanted anyone to ever see them, so I just destroyed them. So I started working with this other artist, collaboration team. His name is Chris Kohlhofer, and he would put an image down on canvas, and then he'd give me the canvas, and I would put an image on top of his, and he would put one on top of mine, and we made these image sandwiches, and neither one of us knew what the other one was going to do. And we showed at Gracie Mansion Gallery, and I thought it was a unique way of making an image, or making a painting at the time. And for some reason I thought, it was radical at that moment to like sort of paint over each other, but it was very difficult, and the ego was involved, and you can imagine two artists just painting on top of each other and neither one of us knowing what the other one was going to do. And so we clashed constantly, and it was very hard, but I learned a lot working with him. I sort of got the idea that I could work with any style, that it was just, I didn't have to, I always had this facility, to create a three-dimensional object in space. And I saw, well, I could work with graphics, and I could work with flatness and abstraction, and combine it all in the same painting. Then the collaboration broke up around 1987, and I started to go off on my own. And I worked, at that point, I didn't use this facility that I had. I used this kind of graphic imagery of a dot system. And I actually had assistants painting things in. I had students I was teaching at the time. And then that evolved into the enamel painting started to drip, and because it is enamel paint. And I started working on metal signs because enamel is archival on metal. I saw the Gerhard Richter enamel paintings on canvas, and they were cracked, and I thought, that they're maybe 25 years old, maybe that could happen to these, so I decided to start working on metal. And since enamel paint is, it's supposed to, well, on the sign painters paint, it's supposed to be good for 80 years outdoors. I thought, well, hey, they're going to be indoors on metal. They're probably going to last forever, with enamel paint on metal. And, the enamel dripped by its very nature, the gravity. And I decided to just start to let that happen. And I worked on a series of ice cream paintings because ice cream, it was conducive to melting and dripping, and I thought it would be funny. And that turned into the food porn paintings and the TV commercial. And what happened with those is the paintings, I paint the underpainting and it starts to fall apart, and the dots try and hold it together, try to pin it down, try to create the image. And so it's this kind of faux expressionism with the drips, and this faux mechanization with the dots, this layering. And I sort of made those paintings to, really to barter them for my TV commercial, for the production values for all the TV, the sound and the director and all the people, the crew. I bartered these paintings to make the commercial. And then that led into the M&M paintings, which started off really a kind of a parody or an homage to Larry Poon's ellipse paintings. And instead of being just straight ellipses, the same complementary colors, I changed it to M&M, meaning Marilyn Minter. And, or me, because sometimes the M sideways spells out me. And I think of this whole series as the narcissism series. And art, this one painting, I titled it, "I'm Not Much, But I'm All I Think About." That's that painting over here. Drew the image. I tried to draw the image with the dots, and then the underpainting just sort of melts away. So the dots are trying to nail that, but really the painting's just falling apart. And the dots are this kind of fake mechanization. And then this abstraction, the way the enamel just flows down. I tried to work really fast, That's sort of a fake expressionism. And I think Picasso is the one that said you have to tell lies to tell the truth. And I think these paintings, are some kind of a truth about my relationship to food, or pleasure, or carnality. So my work is very carnal. Images from that part of the culture are very airbrushed and very tidy, but in reality, things aren't very tidy. Life is very messy, and I don't know, the dots drew the image, and I could let it melt and fall apart, and now I'm using these cuts, in the paintings, and the cuts are sort of bleeding. The painting's bleeding a little bit. And it sort of messes it up, or I use acids on the metal, and the metal gets etched into and scratched, and sort of a more realistic version of what my truth is about these kinds of images. Sex is very untidy. I'm interested in the language of painting, and I take a distance from it on some level, but paintings that are really interesting to me have many layers. You could read them on different layers and different interpretations, and I've always just tried to tell my truth and let the chips fall where they may. I really think that the idea of being politically correct is problematic, because if you're going to tell your truth, you might be hurting somebody's feelings, or you might be offending somebody, and it's going to ring, might be beautiful, but it'll ring false, and I think that's been that plastic medium has been how I articulate what I think of as just my truth, and I don't think there is a truth that, oh yeah, this is the truth. This is the only way a painting should be. This is the only movement that counts. This is the only one that makes any sense. Because then you cut out all that information. There's no more curiosity. And there's no more awe. I do seem to work in this kind of carnal manner, and that's what I must be drawn to. And I work with enamel paint, which I think is very seductive. It's very easy to just walk by a painting, and I really want to seduce the viewer into finding a dialogue, trying to see if there's a dialogue between my viewer and the painting, or even the history of art. What's the dialogue between this painting and all of art history behind it, every brushstroke. I have always had a very ambiguous relationship to pleasure, personally, and these are the images that are compelling to me. And I feel like, in this country, I don't think we don't have a clue what a healthy sexuality would be. It's a very repressed environment, and it's been my experience that repression creates distortion. And I think the real problem with the porn industry is that they just haven't created images for women's fantasies. It's always geared to male pleasure, and it is about fantasy. I've always thought that it's about fantasy, and I'm laboring under the idea that women should start, taking control and making their own images for pleasure, and images for fantasy, and images for arousal. And my paintings don't necessarily address that. I'm not trying to, but I want that language. I'd like to see that language start to develop, and I'm just taking a stab at, beginnings of the images I use are the ones that are compelling to me, and they're not necessarily always sexy. They're just things I find terribly interesting, and I never have figured out why I choose this image or that one. But it usually makes sense, and there's some kind of a continuum if you look back on all the work. So when you think about the food porn paintings, you know, there's this like hands tearing apart food. It's interesting though that all the press has always been that they're female hands with long webbed fingernails, and the truth is I made 106 paintings and half of them are male hands, but no one ever notices that. And tearing apart this food, and I guess they are metaphorical, because I mean, you know, there's all this talk about the images that get our attention, you know, and they are filled with sex and violence, and you know, it is this running theme through American lives, and my life certainly. And I think that the food porn paintings are metaphorical, and they all come from cookbooks, you know, or ads, and then that sort of led into the hardcore porn paintings, and that was at the same time I worked with makeup, you know, because the idea of this makeup, well, I think also the early pop artists who are my heroes, you know, like Wesselman and Warhol, but their work was very flat, you know, you think of Wesselman with the lips smoking a cigarette, and I thought, you know, that I wanted, you know, I think of lipstick as mine, you know, and I have a very ambiguous relationship to makeup myself, and you know, you can think of it as painting your face. It's like war paint. Some people can make a case that it's war paint, and and of course then there is the beauty myth and that Susan Faluti's book, and you know, all of these. I think all of these things are true. All of them are operating at the same time. It's parallel universes. As an artist, you're trying to communicate, and you know, the idea of being indifferent to your viewer. Well, you know, there was a point in time where I made paintings where people came into my studio and they ran out of here. They couldn't even look at them. So you can't show those. And I realized I was not communicating. And that's not my goal, you know. I don't want people to flee. You know, I am trying to, like I said, establish this dialogue with the viewer. And although you have to be indifferent, you do have to be indifferent. You really do. You have to believe in what you're doing, no matter what anyone's saying to you. And on that level, indifference is really healthy. You know, you just, like I said before, you have to make your truth, you know, no matter who's going to bother.
I saw two of the photographs of her mother that she took in 1969, and they were included within the show of her paintings. And then I asked that she will let me see the rest of the project, and I thought they were just absolutely exquisite pictures. And we decided to make a show, which we did in September this year, 1995. Yeah, and I think it was astounding to see the work of her from 20 years ago. This was a series of photographs of her mother that she took in 1969 when she was still a student in Florida, and all it is really 2 rolls of film in which she photographed her mother as she lived in the apartment in Florida, high-rise. Her mother was sort of confined to the house due to her pill use and whatnot. And these pictures, in just rather incredible way, indicate certain type of despondent, a bit wasted, but nevertheless somewhat glamorous life of a very beautiful woman, maybe a little bit past her prime, that never leaves the house, and she puts up her makeup and then she lays down and then she dresses up and dresses down, and it's just this kind of daily routine of a junkie, I suppose one should say, that otherwise this is the type of addiction. In one of the reviews it was said that it's called high-end addiction, which means you cannot really always see it because it takes place behind the closed doors. These people can afford their privacy. So this show, in a way, as jarring and intense as it was, it kind of offered this peeping Tom view into the world that otherwise is difficult to see, and through kind of almost journalistic, very clean pictures, she was able to present that, and all the additional intensity by the relationship of mother and daughter, and the fact that as you look at the photographs, you do to a certain extent see that the mother is very much participating in them. So, you know, she in a way is interested in being represented, and the end result is to see this beautiful, beautiful person that is like Judy Garland with no career, basically, but it has the same type of trouble built into it. So I showed it, I loved it, and I think other people did too.
Like that, I can think of anything else that I want to say about the painting.